I've got a few names here, okay? You have to be very nice, even if it's hard.
Sure.
Can you do that?
I'm going to do my best.
Okay. Julius Malema.
Good singer.
Floyd Chivambo.
Let's go childlike naivety.
Right, it's the second episode of Pap Politics where we talk to newsmakers, whether it's politicians, celebrities, sports stars, you name it, just to talk about what's in the news, but also get a few little tidbits that I know you'll definitely enjoy. And this month, we're talking to the ActionSA Chairperson, Michael Beaumont. Welcome to Pap Politics.
Thank you very much. It's great to be on the show. I've seen it come about and very excited, actually. These kind of shows, I think, are the future.
Well, thank you, because you had to brace this cold weather to come here, and we appreciate that. Now, I want to start with, I guess we're going to call this an icebreaker, okay? I follow you on social media, and one thing about you is that you're not very shy about calling out some of your peers on social media,
yes.
Okay? I love it. I love it. So I'm gonna mention somebody's name, and you have to say something very nice.
Sure.
Yeah, you have to say something very, very nice. You can Aretha Franklin it. Do you know what the Aretha Franklin is? Beautiful gowns. Okay, so a couple of years ago, Aretha Franklin's being interviewed, and the interviewer mentions these artists, musicians, and she has to give her opinion on these musicians. And so the interviewer mentions Whitney Houston, and then she goes, well, Whitney Houston was a talent. Alicia Keys, incredible producer. And then they go to Taylor Swift, and then she says beautiful gowns. So it's a compliment, but nothing about her musical genius.
Okay.
So I've got a few names here, okay? You have to be very nice, even if it's hard.
Sure.
Can you do that?
I'm going to do my best.
Okay, let's start. Tulima Donsela.
Good vision for the country.
Okay. Nelson Mandela.
Oh, I mean, that's a good one. That's an easy one. So
Yeah.
it's a kind of he's the savior of our country. He's the father of our country.
I'm easing you into it.
I can see where this is going. I'm being set up.
Siya Kolisi.
Great leader.
Floyd Chivambo. Be nice.
Trying to think this one. Let's go childlike naivety. How was that for an Aretha? Did it all right there?
Okay, I guess. Okay, and then Julius Malema.
Good singer.
Okay, that's a good one. John Steenhuisen.
Was a good chief whip in Parliament.
Okay. And then Helen Zille.
Sure. Good contributions before 1994.
As a way to kind of segue to that, you know the big story now with Helen Zille, right? That she's possibly considering becoming Joburg's new mayor. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, we read it with great interest, but, I think it's based on some pretty flawed ideas. But the reason why it's become such a topic of debate is Joburg residents are desperate, and desperate people will turn to desperate measures. But if you actually look at it in the cold light of day and explore the merits of the idea itself, it's based on this notion that the experience of Cape Town in 2006 is transplantable into Johannesburg in 2025, which is a ridiculous notion. The cities are hugely different in every shape, way or form. Cape Town had been governed more by 2006 by the National Party than it had by the ANC. Yeah. And the populations are completely different. Black South Africans are a minority in the city of Cape Town. They're a majority in the city of Johannesburg. So when you've got a leader who openly tells them that their pain and the legacy that they live under from the unjust past is just their imagination and they should kind of just get over it. It's quite hard to see how that's going to have an electoral appeal in a way that a party can broaden its support base. But also, Helen Zille has become everything that's wrong with coalitions. And no one's going to govern Joburg with an outright majority, that we know. So I can tell you firsthand that in our coalitions with the DA in Gauteng, Helen Zille is the person who almost single-handedly collapsed every single effort to take back Johannesburg, by way of an example. And I actually had a text message I exchanged with a leader I won't name from another party that was in that coalition. When they saw that article and said, I wonder who she's going to govern with, because it won't be us. So that is the philosophy. She's got the wrong attitude towards coalition. Okay. Certainly the 2025 iteration of Helen Zille does. But I think all of those things make it quite unlikely and quite far-fetched from our point of view. And if anything, I think it begs a question like, why are the DA rolling out geriatrics in 2025? Is there just a lack of leadership available to solve these issues in Johannesburg?
And it's interesting you say that because they do use Cape Town as this shining example of, good governance. But then if you speak to residents in like Khayelitsha or Dunoon or, and it's a different story, it's a different experience. But like you said, the demographics, very, very different, very, very different issues that need, prioritizing.
Completely. And I think the experience of good governance in Cape Town certainly has been very true for some. But for others, it hasn't been true. Yeah. It's not a universally good experience, I think is the way to put it. And we witnessed it from our time working with the DA in coalition in Tshwane and Johannesburg, is that their points of emphasis differ. They use words like we must serve the ratepayers, and they have points of emphasis of those service delivery needs like it's a trade-off, when in fact a city that is an 89 billion rand city like Johannesburg really should be able of serving all people without having to pick and choose. We certainly had that problem when I was back in the DA before we left. And I think that problem continues to persist in such a way that a resident of Joburg asking whether or not an experience of good DA government would be universal or based on where you live could well take place in Johannesburg were they to succeed.
I mean, staying on the topic of metros, ActionSA's Nasipi Moya, in Tshwane, and she's had quite the tenure so far. Are you worried at all that she might suffer the same fate as Celia Brink, for example?
I personally don't think so, for a variety of reasons. And it was a big decision for ActionSA to take because historically we had associated ourselves with a group of parties that had been governing Tshwane.
Sure.
Quite frankly, misgoverning Tshwane. If you look at the facts and the figures and how bankrupt the city was, developed 7 billion rand in debt to Eskom, disparate levels of service delivery. These are real issues that we decided we couldn't be a part of. But, in determining how stable a government would be, generally you've got to look at how successful it is because no party can afford to take out someone who is succeeding because people would rise against that. And in the city of Tshwane, there is a strong initial project of success that Dr. Nasipi Moya is leading, and we're very proud of the work she's doing. We also have the humility to recognize that she's not doing it alone. She's got a really good mayoral committee from different parties who are putting aside party political differences, rolling up their sleeves and doing really good work together. So we must credit and tribute our coalition partners. It's not just being done alone. But there's a corner being turned there. The city has now tabled its first funded budget since 2021. Its credit ratings are now improving. Its investment in infrastructure is going up. It's now become the second lowest levels of dissatisfaction of any metro in the country. There's a growing body of evidence to say the turnaround is beginning. But I think we're also humble enough to know that there's a mountain to climb. And you can never say we've arrived in local government because there's just so much work to do after so many years of bad government there.
What do you think ActionSA is doing differently from other parties as far as their relationship with other parties are concerned to maintain this partnership in metros like Tshwane, for example? Yeah. What are you doing differently?
Yeah, we've had to go through a really steep learning in coalitions because as a party, we used to be the ones that said never, ever will we ever.
Yeah.
And now we've had to say grow up. If you look at South African politics, particularly after May last year, there's very few parties that aren't in coalition with the ANC at some level of government somewhere. And you need to realize that you've got to make these decisions based on their merits. And I think we've taken that approach firstly, which is helpful. Because in some places, the best options might be to work with these parties, and in other places, it might be those parties. But it's about what's going to deliver most effectively to residents, because the strange thing about local government is the personalities matter more than the parties almost. So you can have a situation working very well with one party in Tshwane and very badly with the same party in Joburg. And that just speaks to the issue of the personalities. But, a huge part of it is humility. We've undergone a learning process. We've gone to countries like Denmark and Germany where coalitions are just the norm. You could perceive of a majority government in those countries. And we had some really good learning experiences where leaders of coalition governments there told us that the job of the biggest party is to be the most generous. The job of the biggest parties is to give the most. Because when they are the ones who lead a successful, stable government, they are the ones that benefit from it. So if you get away from these zero-sum game kind of coalitions and you get towards ones that are genuinely about stability and delivery, the rewards will be reaped in turn.
So I'm sitting with you here, and I can't help but wonder how different the situation would have been, how different the political setting would have been had the budget impasse had ended differently. And as ActionSA, you've said that, we're open to being in the GNU, but I'm sure you have your own prerequisites to what you would want, But now we're here. There was talks of ActionSA being in cabinet,
Yes.
What happened there, if you can just...
Well, just to be clear, ActionSA was offered seats in cabinet in the original GNU that was negotiated in June last year, right after the elections. Uh-huh. We declined that because 70% of the South African parliament is now in this GNU. And if you believe power corrupts, well, that's most absolutely going to corrupt. Sure. But also, if you look at it, it's just such an incoherent mess of ideologies and thoughts that, our fear at the time was that it wasn't going to get anything done. And here we are a year later. I mean, literally coming up now, the 14th of June, I think, is the 1-year anniversary mark itself. And what has changed? And that concern really has proven to be quite real, which is why when there was a look that the GNU could collapse around the budget issue and the ANC made overtures towards us in that regard, our answer was very simple. We would be open to talks, but those talks would be predicated on a bunch of ideas. The first is this thing needs to be reset from the beginning because it was a flawed concept right from the beginning. The second thing is it needs a proper coalition agreement. If you do not codify up front that these are the changes we're going to produce in our country, but you just go and elect a president and hope that he kind of gives you those things later, you've lost your negotiating power. And that's where they completely failed in that regard. But also to clarify what those changes must be. Because ActionSA has gone through a process to say, were we to ever be asked to come into the GNU, we for one would want to have every deputy minister removed. There's no need for deputy ministers in South Africa. We have the largest cabinet in the history of South African politics, and it's just about patronage. And that really cannot expect the South African taxpayer to continue paying for these things. It starts at the top. There needs to be a behavioral example before we start reaching deeper into the pockets of South Africans in the way that this government has. There's got to be better funding in the local government space. Local government is a disaster because this national government, including the GNU, believes it's only worth 7% of the national budget. Look around the problems everywhere we go in local government. It's worth more than 7%, and we need to get that resolved. But we also need to see major changes in the space of the NPA. The NPA is totally underfunded, undercapacitated, and poorly led. We need to see proper reforms in immigration. And there were changes of that nature that we said, if we are going to get involved in a GNU, that is our price that we will extract for the South African people. But I suspect that price was way too high for the ANC. And that's fine. They can continue without us, and that's exactly what they've done. And we're very happy to be the point of the spear of opposition politics as well.
Okay, so in other words, the door is kind of open, but that would depend on what happens in the future.
I like to say the door is closed, but it's not locked.
Okay.
And if they'd like to knock on the door, we are more than happy to engage. But at this level, to join this GNU on its current course of trajectory is an unmitigated disaster. Because when you get past the warm and fuzzies that people feel about the GNU because of what it avoided by way of an extremist government, and you actually ask yourself the question, how is unemployment now, a year later? How is economic growth? How is violent crime and the response of the state through the police and the NPA? The answers are not good. Every one of those metrics is going in the wrong direction. And there's not a single serious policy reform that you can point to say there's hope on the horizon.
Do you foresee a situation where the GNU gets, in other words, gets so volatile that it collapses and eventually they have no choice but to heed or accept whatever you're putting on the table? And how soon?
Yeah, I mean, we do think it's going to be, it does have a shelf life. We don't know how long that shelf life will be. Mm-hmm. But, you know, the reason why we say that is because when we spoke earlier about good coalitions and bad coalitions, we spoke about coalitions where, you know, the rising tide lifts all boats. Mm-hmm. The problem with this GNU is it doesn't have a clear vision. It doesn't have a coherent idea for how it's going to fix the country. And what's therefore emerged is the zero-sum game where for the ANC to succeed, they need to cling on to their policy directions of the past. And for the DA to succeed, they need to achieve reversals in those policy directions. So it becomes a situation where one's loss is one's gain, which is a very dangerous dynamic in a coalition between the two largest parties in that space. And I think a lot of instability is going to arise because of that. From our point of view, I think the only way we would be able to negotiate an acceptable arrangement in the GNU with those requirements I mentioned earlier was if the ANC came to us and our numbers were highly relevant. Right now, ActionSA bringing its 6 seats to a 70% GNU is meaningless. It's window dressing. And we would want to be in a position where our support is required and therefore we could exact those reforms.
Okay, so now we'll talk about this possibility of an ActionSA included GNU, and we've got this partnership between ActionSA and the ANC. And I think about the ActionSA president, Herman Mashaba, who for a long time has been one of the fiercest critics of, the ANC.
Sure.
And I can't help but wonder, how do you strike a balance as a political party? Politics is politics. Do you chalk it up to, I don't know, you're going to be the Melania Trump, and, I'll just marry you. I don't like you. I don't have to like you. I'll just marry you and I'll sleep next to you. But then you also have to make sure that you don't compromise, your values as a party. How do you strike that balance?
Sure.
Especially, in the current landscape.
Sure. So I think, let me just clarify one thing. We are still very critical of the ANC.
Sure.
Many of the problems we see in South Africa today have been deepened by the ANC, and there's no way of getting around that.
Yeah.
I think what really changed for us, though, is we had been in a situation where we said we'll never work with the ANC. And by just sheer virtue of numbers, that meant we had to tie ourselves to a group of parties, principally with the Democratic Alliance. Mm-hmm. And the experience of the Democratic Alliance is very different between place to place. So in some places, they govern quite well, and working with them is plausible and feasible and productive.
Sure.
But in Tshwane, for example, it was an unmitigated disaster. There's no way around that. I mean, in 2020, Tshwane owed Eskom nothing. In 2024, it owed it 7.2 billion rand. And they were collecting everyone's money for electricity the whole time and just not paying Eskom. So, there's a myriad of examples like that to say we can't attach ourselves to a party without regard for how they're performing. We actually have to look at what is the best choice in that municipality. So that is why we took the decision that we did. But even when you enter a coalition with any party, and let's not be personalize it with the ANC, let's call it any party, you have to realize that a key part of a coalition is holding one another accountable. That's why coalitions is one of the virtues of coalitions, because majority governments could just do what they like. But a coalition, there's checks and balances in that I'm not going to let you do the wrong things that could reflect badly on me. So I'm going to hold you accountable. And there is that dynamic taking place. And we have to be vigilant of one another. And I think that is taking place in Tshwane, and that's why it's working. But we have very clear red lines. And we must understand that the mayor is the leader of that government as defined in the Constitution. Any person who breaks the law, who acts in a manner that is unacceptable constitutionally, will be removed by the mayor. And if that causes the collapse of the coalition, so be it. That is the nature of governance and leadership. And we can never be afraid to take the right decisions for fear of what the ramifications must be.
And how soon do you think before we have Herman Mashaba, or let's just say ActionSA, in the union buildings? Because obviously, like I said, the political landscape is a little different. Coalition governments are the way now, and you've managed to kind of work your way around that. But how soon before you've managed to, I guess, mastered it to such an extent that you guys end up in the union buildings?
Look, I'm not sure how much of it is about mastery. I mean, I think our approach towards the GNU right now is a good one, to say that we're available in as much as you're willing to commit to these reforms. Mm-hmm. But there's not a willingness to commit to them, and there's not a mathematical requirement for them to do so. If the GNU were to fall apart in its current kind of iteration and were to be redesigned, and those kind of reforms would come into play, that would be something we would be open to. As to whether that's going to happen between now and 2029 is anyone's guess. I think it is entirely possible, because it's ill-fated just from the get-go. And particularly it's going to become ill-fated when the present levels of instability because of a lack of coherent ideas is going to result in public anger rising. And when political parties like the DA see their electorate starting to question more and more why they are part of a government that is reducing employment, not increasing it, where economic growth is still happening at below population growth levels, et cetera, they're going to start asking tougher and tougher questions in that environment, and instability is going to arise. But, what we say now is what we'll say in 2029 in a future government. Our willingness to be part of government is not based on our love of German sedans and soft leather. It's based on whether or not that government will commit to reforms that are core to our manifesto. And if they are not willing to commit to those reforms, we will not support them. And I think that's a vital difference that we have to engage. But between now and then, we're quite happy to be a constructive opposition. And what we mean by that is we're not going to just fight for the sake of fighting. We're not going to be childish. If good proposals come forward, we will lend our support to prevent that from being shot down. But if bad proposals are coming forward, we will shoot them down, and we'll shoot them down very vocally.
Now, next year you've got the local government elections, and I just want to know, how battle ready are you as ActionSA? Some would say this is your time to shine.
Yeah, it is. 2024 was a disappointing result for us, but there's no question it was a disappointing result for everyone other than MK, because MK literally just sucked the oxygen out of this last election in a manner that was unprecedented.
Nobody expected that.
No. Well, some of the pollsters called it, but we all thought they were crazy. But nonetheless, here they are. I think it's an interesting dynamic because I'm not sure they're going to be able to sustain that level of interest. In other words, people who run businesses will often tell you about the problems of growth. Mm-hmm. And I think going from zero to hero, where they achieved in 2024, presents massive risks that I'm not sure they're going to be able to sustain through the challenges of candidate selection and other things like that. And already we're seeing a lot of people who left our ranks for MK now coming back, which is an interesting anecdote because obviously that, you apply it across the board and it becomes numerically significant. But we are working very hard on that turnaround. We've always been a party that's more orientated towards local government than national and provincial government. So we've got a natural appeal there. But also we've got this really interesting dynamic going on where, 99% of South Africa's municipalities are governed by the three parties, the ANC, the DA and the IFP. But now you've got a situation where ActionSA is not just able to demonstrate the track record of leaders like Herman Mashaba and Athol Trollip, two of the most successful metro mayors in South African history. But now we've got someone, this young woman in China, Dr. Nasipi Moyo, who's really starting to do great work. So there's an ability to show South Africans a fourth way, a different way, in an environment where people have given up on local government because the established players have let them down so fundamentally. And I think that's something we're very excited about, sharing with the South African people and using to galvanize their support.
Now, looking at the structure now in Parliament, I think the criticism coming from opposition, sometimes it does seem like just some random, nonsensical political back and forth, but a constructive political opposition system helps hold government accountable. Do you think you're actually doing that in Parliament?
Without any question. We are in Parliament right now in the Standing Committee on Finance, and we'll be lending our support to the revised fiscal framework because it doesn't have a VAT increase, which is something to demonstrate that we are willing to put our hands up at the right times to provide support where it's needed. And even when the first VAT framework was being discussed, and we felt that parties in the GNU were holding the national budget hostage to achieve powers within the GNU in a manner that was quite frankly quite unpatriotic, we were willing to step in and negotiate with the ANC to ensure there was no VAT increase on one hand, but to ensure that the budget wasn't held ransom in the process. So we will be constructive in that process, and we will lend our support where we deem it necessary. And what's really interesting is it's taking place in a vacuum of opposition. That's the strangest thing. And the people like Athol Trollip, who's been in Parliament for so many years, share these stories with us that are just mind-blowing because the South African opposition space has been decimated. All those parties that used to be in opposition have now gone into government. Even the MPs who remain, technically in Parliament and holding government to account can't hold their own party to account and won't. And the EFF and MK are shocking opposition parties. They have absolutely no general coherence in terms of the way they go about their work. So you literally have a 6-seat ActionSA that has become the unofficial leader of the opposition. And if you look at what's going on in that space, we're operating like we're 60. And I think that's a nice niche space for us to operate in, but always with the desire of being constructive. We're not there just to bite ankles and be difficult. We will be constructive. We will share ideas because ultimately what we want is our country to succeed.
Because I was going to ask you if you thought other parties were playing ball, especially if you know that you've got a common goal. You're not going to pass this bill, or this is what you actually want to lead, or etc. But I guess that answers my question. Now, as we wrap up, I've got something, and I think I do this with every guest. Okay, I'm going to...
Oh dear. I thought
Yeah.
the games were over with in the beginning.
No, I have to. I have to. I want to test your knowledge of like pop culture.
Oh, my word.
And yeah, I think that's a winning recipe. Like politics, how much do you know about your pop culture?
I thought it was pop culture here. What pop culture?
Well, this is the pop. This is the pop.
Okay. Because I must warn you, my music tastes are very old.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Okay. No, but I'm sure you've seen some of these people.
I wouldn't be so sure, but let's give it a try.
Okay, do you know who this is?
No.
You don't. Okay, that's DJ Maphorisa. Does it ring a bell? Okay.
No, I'm afraid not.
Okay, this. You have to know who this guy is, surely.
That's DJ Black Coffee, right?
There you go. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, there you go. Okay. And this? Who's this? Please tell me you know who this is.
I've got a name in my head, but I don't think it's Nicki Minaj.
That is Nicki Minaj.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I picked one of her signature looks.
We've got like a 2/3 majority going on here. This is going well.
There you
Let's
go.
end it quickly.
Okay, you have to know. Come on.
Is that Beyonce?
That is Beyonce.
Okay.
Beyonce. Okay, I will admit I wasn't sure myself.
It's not the most kind of obvious picture of
Yeah, I don't know the hair
Yes.
flowing in the
Yeah,
background. Okay, and this?
No, you stumped me there.
Come on, surely. I mean, you might want him to perform at a rally one day.
I probably would.
Yeah,
Or
come on.
maybe rephrase, our supporters probably would.
Yeah, definitely. You don't like not okay. Cass.
Ah, Casper Nyves.
There you go. Okay.
All right.
This is okay. I've got two more, but you know who this is, right?
Yeah, that's Tyler.
Oh, okay, great.
We good there.
And then this. Okay, I know who this is, but I forgot the name myself. Do you know who this is?
No. But if you forgot the name, what chance do I really have?
Wait, I forgot the name. It's not P squared.
This is like that part of the show we got to call a friend.
Yeah. But Burner Boy, there you go.
Oh, okay.
It's Burner
All right.
Boy, sorry.
Look, I did a lot better than I thought I would.
You really
but
did
I
well.
don't listen to a lot of music after the 2000s, if I'm dead honest with you.
Oh, no, sure. No, I get it. But Michael Beaumont, thank you so much for this. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a great conversation.
And good luck for the next couple of, I don't know, until next year, because you've got your work cut out for you, I can imagine.
Yeah, thank you. And same to you guys. I think podcasts are the future of media, and I really wish you guys all the best in growing the show.
Thank you.